Today I revisited a painting that I didn't like. After staring at this piece, feeling the self-doubt and imposter syndrome talk to me like Norman Osborn talking to himself in the mirror, I finally caved and became the Green Goblin.
The board members. You killed them.
We killed them.
But seriously, the inner monologue was on full blast today, making it really hard to feel confident in my work. I kept thinking I could do better, and I believed it. I really could do better. For those new to the channel, over the past few videos I've been working on illustrating a set of 44 oracle cards. Different from tarot cards, oracle cards have their own meanings and are independent of the meanings of traditional tarot. The meanings of these cards are usually up to the artist's interpretation, which is why I was drawn to them. I wouldn't have to be limited by the imagery and interpretations prescribed by traditional tarot. With such an ambitious project, I anticipated many hiccups and roadblocks along the way. But one thing I really didn't anticipate was how much I'd be battling my own self-confidence with every piece. So far, I've made 5 cards, all in a miniature format. While I like a few of the ideas in these pieces, since I've made those previous videos, I've been constantly looking at these artworks, and I've started to dislike them. What challenges me currently is whether to listen to that Green Goblin with all of its self-doubt, or to carry on and continue at the pace I've been working. While truly challenging, what I know is that the only way to have harmony is to strike balance with the Green Goblin, listening and acknowledging the thoughts without beating myself up over them. Through reflection, I found that some of the doubts were right. I really didn't like the work because I knew somehow I could do better. I was struggling to keep up with weekly uploads and a self-imposed timeline for this project. This all culminated into work that I really wasn't happy with. I haven't fully surrendered to my goblin side and destroyed everything I've worked on so far, but I've decided to take what I have and improve upon it. I would iterate. So from here, I decided to go back to the first card and redo it, with more intention, planning, and space. What I lacked in those initial few cards was real planning. Often when I was struggling to think of ideas for artworks, I'll just try something. With no real thought behind what I was doing, I'll just put images onto the paper and see what works. For the most part, this got me through the first few cards, but in retrospective, it didn't make me very happy with the outcome. They felt like images just thrown together without real thought for composition or design. While I did think about the imagery I wanted in relation to the meaning to the card, I wasn't really thinking about how it would all fit together on the page. This time around, I started to treat the original painting like a thumbnail drawing, a concept art that would help me in the final product. Taking some of the imagery and elements from the original piece, I took intentional steps in planning and decided to draw some thumbnails in my sketchbook to test out some ideas. Leaning on some of the imagery of the previous painting, I kept the skull being pierced by the sword, but this time replaced it with a human skull rather than a crow. I kept the same asphodel flowers to accompany the skull as a symbol of death, as well as the imagery of the bee that would align with the theme of this deck. I played with some variations with the skull placement before settling on a 3/4 view. The thumbnails remained fairly similar to what I created in the final drawing, with some of the placements of objects being slightly altered. As I reflect on this piece in the process of making this video, I probably could have done a few more thumbnail sketches to really iron out the details before moving on. The planning stage is incredibly crucial to the success of a piece, and it can go miles in the way of helping an artwork feel impactful. While you'll come to find that I'm a lot happier with this piece than the last one, there are still some areas that I find that need improvement. I found that with a little more time in the planning phase, this could have helped improve those areas. I started the final drawing on the usual 140-pound watercolor paper, taped along the edges using masking tape. For these cards, you've probably noticed that I'm not adhering the paper to a board like I usually do. This is because I plan to scan this artwork on a flatbed scanner, which is much easier without a board attached to it. I'm also making this drawing using colored pencil rather than graphite pencil. This is because I find that with lighter colors like the whites of the skull and flowers that I'll be putting in later, the graphite tends to shine through it a lot more easily than the colored pencil, making it harder to cover up the pencil marks. Graphite is inherently shiny, meaning that it will reflect light through paint layers much easier than other drawing media. This is why oil painters will usually use charcoal instead of pencil for their drawings. I haven't tried this before because I generally use regular pencils for my drawings, but I figured this would be an interesting time to give it a try, and I was pleasantly surprised about how it turned out. I found, however, it can be a lot harder to erase than typical pencils, which required me to be a bit more intentional about my mark making as I went. I started with this sword as a reference point to anchor the rest of the drawing, then added the skull over the top of it. I again changed the angle of the skull from the thumbnail, as I felt it helped guide the viewer's eye from left to right across the page when it faced this direction. The honeybees are the final element of this drawing and are the main thematic elements of this piece that ties it together with the rest of the deck. With the original 5 cards previously created, I was working with various pollinators, with the same holding true for this new card. You'll find that in these initial stages of the project that I'll be doing a lot of reworking and iterations. While I would love to show you the most glamorous parts of this process, I do want to give you a more authentic look of how I'm working on this project with all the struggles and redos that go along with it. My current trajectory is to rework a few of the initial cards on a larger scale, with more intention and planning, giving them a little more visual interest in their design. I'm already in the works on the next piece, which I plan to show off in a later video. At this stage in the drawing, I got the idea of having the bees nesting and creating honeycombs within the skull and wanted to draw this out in the final piece. I really should have went back to initial sketches and tested some of these ideas out before moving on to the final drawing, but I think in the end it actually worked out. For future drawings, I really want to learn to pace myself and be more comfortable with going back to the planning stage whenever I have ideas halfway through the drawing. With the drawing complete, I moved into painting the background. Like with previous cards, I started with a wet and wet application, applying a coat of water over the surface before moving in with the paint. This allows the paint to spread out more naturally over the surface of the paper as it mixes with the water. For the application of paint, I splattered on some reds and blues across the paper, making a mess of my desk in the process. From there, I spun the paper around, allowing the water to carry the paint to help it spread out a little more easily. I applied more and more layers of splattered paint before letting the whole thing dry for a good hour. After the surface was dry and the paper was no longer warped in the middle, I started in with the skull. I chose acrylic gouache for this piece because I knew that if I used regular gouache, it would start to pick up the watercolor layer below as I applied more and more paint, making it harder to start with the background filled in first. Thankfully, I've been enjoying the process of using acrylic gouache, so it was fun to play with a medium that was relatively new to me. During the process of painting the skull, I started to realize a pretty big mistake that I had already made. The background, while fun and colorful, had a lot of sharp edges between color transitions. This is because as I was painting, the layer below continued to dry as I was applying paint, meaning that some layers did not get to disperse fully within a saturated layer, causing some sections to have sharper edges. While not an artwork ruining problem, the difficulty is that sharp edges in a piece tend to draw the viewer's attention, meaning that we have unwanted attention in the background away from the actual subject matter. Even after I finish this piece, I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. I ended up keeping the background as is for now, and I'm still contemplating how to fix this. With that mistake noted, I continued on with the rest of the piece, moving into painting the honeycomb within the eye sockets. I actually really enjoy this detail, and I'm glad that I incorporated it on a whim. I think it really adds some visual interest to the otherwise ordinary skull. It also helps to incorporate the honeybee theme behind the cards, making sure that they are part of the imagery and not just tacked on for the sake of them needing to be included. Based on the imagery, I think you can make a pretty good guess as to the meaning of this card. As with most oracle cards, a meaning or interpretation usually accompanies them. While some are meant to have more ambiguous meanings to help tap into the reader's intuition, I think for these cards I would like to have written out some of the meanings to help the user with interpretation. This means along the way I'll need to be intentional about the meanings behind each card as I'm going. So far, I've had a vague idea of the meanings, working off several simple key words to inspire each artwork. From there, I plan to create each piece and dive into the actual meanings, writing in some of the in-depth interpretations after the fact. I've never really done this before, so I'm not sure what the best avenue for creating these cards and meanings are, but this feels the most natural. Here I'm working on the asphodel flowers, another symbol of death. In Greek legend, this flower is associated with the underworld. More specifically, the asphodel meadows are a place where most souls go after they die, and are one of the main divisions of the underworld. Elysium is where the righteous souls were rewarded, Tartarus is where the vicious souls would be punished, and the asphodel meadows are where the common souls went. This is a place for those who lived mediocre lives. Throughout Greek myth, this particular flower had many associations with death. However, many believe that the association is more notable because of the pale white color resembling the dead. Next, I painted the honeybees. I'm glad I increased the size of the working area, as it gave me plenty of room to paint these tiny creatures. Most importantly, honeybees symbolize productivity, often being an omen of hard but rewarding work, just like how the honeybee works tirelessly to make honey. In this piece in particular, I want to call upon the imagery of death as a sign of inevitable change. Similar to the tarot card Death, it is not necessarily a bad omen, but one of change. Similarly, I want to call upon this same sense of change, but with the honeybee imagery suggesting that maybe this change requires some amount of work to fulfill. Finally, I painted the sword, which stabs through the skull. I'm not yet sure what this truly means, but I like to think it has something to do with the hard work needed for this change. Maybe it details the hardships faced when putting in the work to make change, and that it can often lead to setbacks that can damage the hard work that is your carefully built honeycomb. In the end, I think this piece is a great example of the work I've been putting in as an artist. I've been struggling to carefully listen to that inner monologue that tells me I'm not good enough, but also critically listening to tell when it might be right and I do really want to try again. It's important that I remember that I'm not intended to like every single piece that I make, and if I did, I'd never have any motivation to improve. Anyway, I'm very happy with how this piece turned out. I think it's a big improvement from the last one. While I still wouldn't say this piece is perfect, I think it's a big improvement. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.